My wife lay there, bloody on the floor of what was once our home, now a crime scene. Her attacker was her stepfather, a man who was supposed to be family. But the real gut punch didn't come from him. It came from her mother. She stood in the corner, trembling, her eyes wide as she watched her own daughter, who was protecting her, get beaten unconscious. Not a single scream. Not a single move to save her. Witnessing everything without intervening, her silence was more brutal than any of his blows. And when the person you love most is on the floor, beaten and bloody, and their own mother chooses to just watch, what do you do to get justice? My name is David Carter, Captain, U.S. Army. I've been through war zones, seen enough death, and I thought I had left all the darkness behind when I came home. On the battlefield, I'm a soldier. At home, I'm just Sarah's husband. We got married right after I returned from my last tour, and since then, everything in our small apartment was proof of a new beginning. Simple breakfasts, laughter in the middle of the night, Sarah holding me after my nightmares. She is my peace. She's the place where all the chaos of the outside world has to stop at the door. She's the one who taught a soldier like me that silence isn't always tension, that some mornings all you need is the smell of coffee and the sound of her laugh. She is family, the end of every mission, the reason I come home. That was the life I swore to protect at all costs, and that was what got me through the last 18-hour shift. The thought of coming home to her, but as I turned into my housing complex, a cold sense of unease crept into my chest. The door to our apartment was ajar. My heart seized. Sarah never leaves the door like that. I shoved it open and went inside. The scene in the room was like a cold blade straight through the chest. Sarah was lying crumpled on the living room rug. A dark red trickle of blood escaped from the corner of her mouth. Standing over her was Richard Kane, her stepfather, swaying, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. His fist was clenched, clearly ready for another swing. But the thing that made my heart stop for a beat was in the corner of the room. Sarah's mother, Helen, was frozen there. Her hands covered her mouth, her eyes wide, tear-filled, and brimming with horror, but she was completely silent. Not one scream, not one move to intervene. She just stood there, trembling, a silent spectator to her own daughter's hell. In that moment, every emotion inside me turned to ice. There was no shouting, no panic, just a deadly calm that took over my mind. The soldier in me took control. Richard turned, noticing me. His eyes widened. You. He didn't finish the sentence before he lunged at me, but I didn't step back. I pivoted, using his own momentum and my body weight to throw him to the floor. A chokehold, just tight enough that he couldn't move or scream, only gurgle in rage. My left arm pinned Richard down. My right hand reached for the military radio on my belt. I keyed the mic. My voice was steady, without a tremor. Captain Carter. Requesting MPs at Housing Unit 2B. Domestic situation. We have a casualty. I repeat, we have a casualty. Only when I heard the confirmation, Roger, on our way, did I loosen my grip slightly. Enough for Richard to breathe but not escape. I shifted toward Sarah, my eyes never leaving him. Pulse, breathing, checking her pupils. The medic in me took over, pushing everything else away. Then I looked up, straight at Helen. She was still standing there, tears streaming down her face, but not a sound. I said nothing. I just looked at her. A cold, hard look, and I think, in that moment, she understood. It was over. The shriek of police sirens grew closer from a distance. My anger didn't disappear. It just settled, turning into something colder, sharper. The wail of the ambulance siren was deafening, echoing in my head like artillery fire. I sat next to Sarah, my hand clutching hers, which was growing cold. Her breathing was shallow, but it was there. Every time her fingers twitched, I felt like I was still holding on to the thin thread that kept her with me. Outside, through the frosted glass, I could hear Richard screaming as the MPs forced his head down into the patrol car. He cursed, howled, trying to play the victim. His voice blended with the siren, chaotic, excruciating. I closed my eyes, forcing myself not to listen. In that moment, my mind pulled me back. She had told me about her biological father, a kind, quiet man who used to make her wooden toys when she was a child. Whenever she mentioned him, Sarah's eyes would light up with a soft smile, but then her voice would drop when she talked about his sudden death, and the void that followed, which paved the way for another name. Richard Kane. I still remember how Sarah felt when she talked about him, the man who entered her and her mother's life looking like a savior, a polished ex-logistics officer promising to fill the void her father left. My mom believed him, she had said, a sad smile on her lips. She needed someone to believe in, but Sarah, even as a child, had seen something behind the facade. She told me about his cold eyes, the way he looked at their house not as a home, but as new territory to conquer. Sarah had been uneasy from the start. Every time she voiced her concern, Helen would brush it off, telling her she was imagining things or being oversensitive. I vividly remember Sarah sitting across from me that day, her hands twisting in her lap. Her voice was trembling, but firm. I never trusted him, and I'm scared, David. Scared my mom will never see who he really is. Back then, I took her hand and promised that if anything ever happened, I would stand between her and him. A simple promise, but it was everything. Now, in the back of this ambulance, my hand was still holding hers. But Sarah was no longer strong enough to hold back. And I wondered, was this the day she had feared all along? Had Richard Kane just brought us to the final act of the nightmare he started years ago? The ambulance came to a screeching halt at the hospital, pulling me back to reality. They wheeled Sarah's gurney into the emergency room. The double doors swung open, then shut right in my face. I was left behind again. A few hours later, they let me see her. Sarah was still unconscious, her arm bandaged, her face bruised. I sat down, looking at the wounds on the woman I loved, and the cold rage inside me surged again. This wasn't an accident. This was the result of something that had been festering for years. I held her hand, my own pulse pounding like a silent, furious drum. No screaming, no crying, just a coldness, like steel, spreading through my veins. The memory of a story Sarah once told me surfaced, one she only dared to share long after we were married. Her voice had shaken as she recalled the night she turned 14. That night, Richard had flown into a rage over a dress. Sarah was wearing a dress her biological father had given her for her last birthday. Richard saw it, and his face darkened. You think you're some kind of princess? In this house you do as I say. He snatched a dinner plate from the table and threw it against the wall. The sound of it shattering was like a gunshot. Sarah said Helen had stood there, trembling but silent, just like the night I found her in our apartment. Not a word of protest, not a single protective gesture. But the worst part wasn't the violence. It was the humiliation. Richard picked up her father's Navy medal, the only memento she had left. He sneered, then threw it onto the tiled floor. Now, he growled, I'm the only man in this house. For Sarah, when that medal hit the floor, the heaviest thing wasn't the sound of metal on tile, but the feeling of her father being crushed right in front of her. That night, Richard didn't just destroy a memory. He bound their spirits in his circle of fear. I looked at Sarah's motionless face. That bruise wasn't just from tonight's beating. It was the mark of years of silent suffering. His war with her family was now my war. And in my wars, I don't lose. A plan began to form in my mind. Clear, precise, and with no room for mercy. The morning after the surgery, the doctor came into her room. His voice was professional, but I felt every word like a needle piercing my skin. She'll pull through. It's not life-threatening, but... He paused for a beat. The psychological trauma could be long-lasting. It will take a lot of time to recover. I nodded. I sat there, in the sterile hospital hallway, the smell of antiseptic filling the air. The MPs had taken my initial statement. Richard was in custody. Helen had been taken to a separate room to calm down. Everything was proceeding by the book. But one question kept replaying in my mind. How do you live with cracks that will never fully heal? And then, the old memory came flooding back, giving me no peace. It was 2 years ago, when Sarah and I were newlyweds. The phone rang in the middle of the night. It was Sarah who answered. I saw her bolt upright in bed, her face pale. On the other end, Helen's voice was trembling, choked with tears. Sarah, I can't take it anymore. He's going to kill me. She was calling from a payphone, miles from her house. Richard had gone on another rampage. This time, it was worse. She said he'd threatened to end it all. Mom, come here, Sarah pleaded, her voice shaking. You'll be safe here. David and I will protect you. I grabbed the phone. Helen, listen to me. I'll drive over and get you right now. Just tell me where you are. But on the other end, there was only hesitation, then fear. No, I can't. He'll find out. He'll kill you both. Then go to the police, I snarled, trying to suppress my anger. Do something. No, I can't. You two just live your lives. Forget about me. And then she hung up. The next day, unable to sit still, I reported the incident to my unit's legal department. A civilian investigation was launched. Local police went to their house. But when the police questioned her, Helen denied everything. I vividly remember the moment she looked Sarah straight in the eye, then turned to the officer, her voice trembling with false sincerity. My daughter. She has some prejudice against her stepfather. Sometimes she blows things out of proportion. It was just a small argument, officer. I remember Sarah at that moment. She stood there, completely still, as if all the blood had been drained from her body. The way she looked at her mother, it wasn't the look of a daughter anymore. It was the look of a victim being buried alive for the second time by her own family. The investigation was closed. Richard had won. He called me right after, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. Told you, Captain? Stay out of my family business. That night, Sarah cried, not because of Richard, but because of her mother. She chose him. David, she whispered. Her voice cracking. She chose to stay in hell. From that day on, we cut off all contact with Helen. In our small apartment, her name was never mentioned again. Sarah once whispered to me, her voice hoarse, if she chooses him over me, then I don't have a mother anymore. I didn't argue, because I knew that decision was the necessary cut for Sarah to keep on living. Now, sitting by her hospital bed, looking at my wife's bandaged body, I wondered, did Helen ever feel regret? Or did she still believe that siding with Richard was the only way to survive? An MP officer walked over, breaking my train of thought. Captain Carter, we need to take Mrs. Helen's statement, but she's only willing to talk to you. I stood up, the cold inside me deeper than the hospital floor. Fine. If she wants to talk, I'll listen. Let's see who she chooses to protect this time. The room where they kept Helen was small and white, with only a chair and a table. She sat there, hunched over, looking small and broken. An MP stood in the corner, silent. She looked up as I walked in, her swollen eyes filled with a fragile hope. David, Sarah, how is she? I stood a few feet away. My arms crossed over my chest. My voice was flat. She'll live. That's not what you really want to ask, is it? She flinched at my coldness. David, I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. I tried. Tried what? I cut in. My voice still low but sharp as a knife. Tried to watch your own daughter get beaten unconscious? She broke down, sobbing. Tonight, he went crazy. He said he was going to kill me. I ran away. I didn't know where else to go. But here. I just wanted to see Sarah. And then, the scattered pieces in my head clicked into place, forming a complete, horrifying picture. I closed my eyes, visualizing the entire tragic chain of events from tonight. Helen, after years of abuse, had finally reached her limit. She had done what she should have done 2 years ago. She ran. She went to the only place she thought was safe, to the daughter she had once disowned. But Richard, that monster, wasn't about to let his prey escape so easily. He had tracked her down, maybe through her phone, or maybe he just guessed where she would go. He didn't come here to bring his wife back. He came for retribution, to punish Helen for daring to run. and to punish Sarah for daring to shelter a fugitive. Tonight's attack wasn't a drunken rage. It was a calculated act of revenge. Richard wanted to show both of them that there was no escape. He wanted to prove that even with me here, even on a military base, he was still the one in control. And Sarah, my wife, she had lain there, taking those blows. Not just for herself. She was beaten for opening the door to the very mother who had turned her back on her. She was beaten for trying to protect the woman who chose silence to protect her abuser. I opened my eyes and looked straight at Helen. Her tears meant nothing to me now. You didn't run away, I said, my voice clear and precise. You just brought hell from your house to mine. And you let your daughter pay the price for your cowardice. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her with her own weeping. I went straight to the officer waiting in the hallway. I'm ready to give my full statement, I said, and I have something that will ensure Richard Kane never sees the light of day again. The young MP Sergeant, Harris, looked at me seriously. Captain, anything you have will be helpful. I left the hospital once Sarah was stable, leaving guards at her door. I told them, no one gets in without my authorization. They nodded. No questions asked. A car took me back to the housing complex. The hallway was now cordoned off with yellow tape. Our apartment had become a crime scene, with MPs still on site, collecting evidence. I showed my ID and requested access. I was no longer just a husband sitting by a hospital bed. I was an officer, and I needed the truth. Before, I had let it go. I had respected Sarah's decision to cut ties with her mother, to let the past lie. I did it because Helen had chosen her path, and I wouldn't interfere. But tonight, Richard had crossed the line. He had brought the war to my doorstep. He had touched Sarah. Before, this was their war. I stayed out of it because that's what Sarah wanted. But when he crossed the threshold of my home, when he spilled my wife's blood on our floor, he made it my war. In my head, the image of Sarah, bloody and beaten, replayed over and over. Her on that hospital bed, pale amidst a tangle of tubes. I knew, if I didn't act, Kane would continue, and Helen she would stand by again, crying in a dark corner, while her own daughter's blood stained the floor. I had the technicians pull up the feed from the security camera in our home. The screen flickered, then played the recording. The scene unfolded with horrifying clarity. The frantic knocking. Helen appearing on camera, her hair a mess, her voice choked with sobs. Sarah, I have nowhere else to go. Please, let me in. Sarah quickly pulled her mother inside, holding her tight, but they barely had a chance to sit down before the door burst open again. Richard Kane appeared, his large frame filling the doorway. His face was red, his eyes burning with booze and fury. His roar filled the room. Think you could run? Sarah stood in front of her mother, her voice trembling but firm. You're not touching her again. The video recorded every punch, every slap, every curse Richard hurled. It recorded Sarah falling to the floor, but she kept trying to get up, still spreading her arms to shield Helen. He kept hitting her, heavy, brutal blows, until she finally collapsed. And worst of all, it recorded the moment Helen shrank into the corner, hands over her head, doing nothing but sobbing, never moving, never screaming for help, never calling the police, not once trying to stop him. Her silence on the video was more terrifying than Richard's roars. The rage inside me surged as I stood there, watching the screen. Every detail was seared into my mind like a brand. This video was undeniable proof to convict Kane. It was also a silent verdict for Helen. In that cold, brightly lit room I realized, the camera's eye never blinks. And it had seen everything: Richard's brutality and the cowardice of the woman who was supposed to be a mother. I wasn't waiting for a miracle. I handed the video over to the military's legal unit. Those who had been doubtful, who had been cautious, now had no reason to hesitate. Image don't lie. The legal battle began. In the first hearing, Richard's lawyer painted a completely different picture. He argued that Richard had only come to talk sense into his stepdaughter, and that I, with the violent nature of a soldier, had attacked him first. Helen's testimony, as I expected, was weak and contradictory. She cried about her fear, but then tried to downplay Richard's guilt, saying he didn't mean it, and it was just the alcohol. I sat there, silent, observing. I saw the smugness on Richard's face as he believed he was controlling the narrative. He didn't know he was walking straight into the trap I had set. The Army's legal unit backed me completely. I had given them a copy of the video but asked them to hold it as our ace in the hole, to be played only at the decisive moment. The final day in court arrived. Sarah sat beside me, her hand clutching mine. She had recovered physically, but I could see the tension in her eyes. "I trust you," she whispered. That was all I needed. Richard's lawyer once again stood up, eloquently defending his client. He concluded by looking directly at the jury. "There is no evidence to suggest that my client intentionally assaulted Miss Carter. There is only the testimony of a resentful soldier and an unstable mother. I move to have all charges dismissed." The courtroom air grew heavy. The judge looked at my lawyer. "Prosecution, do you have a rebuttal?" My lawyer, a seasoned major, stood up. "Yes, Your Honor, we do. We have a witness that never lies." He turned to me, and I nodded. A large screen was lowered in the middle of the courtroom. I saw Richard's lawyer frown, and a flicker of confusion crossed Richard's face. The prosecution would like to present the security camera footage recorded at Captain Carter's home on the night of the incident. The video began to play. The entire courtroom fell silent. Everyone held their breath, watching. They saw Helen run in. They saw Richard kick the door open. They saw Sarah stand up to shield her mother. And then they saw the first punch. A collective gasp of horror rippled through the jury box. They saw Sarah fall. They heard Richard's savage curses. And they saw Helen, cowering in the corner, completely silent. The video played on, documenting the entire brutal assault. When the footage showed me storming in and taking Richard down, no one saw it as an act of aggression anymore. It was a rescue. The tape ended. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. I glanced at Richard. His smugness was gone, replaced by panic. His face was ashen. He turned to his lawyer, but the man was speechless, his mouth agape as he stared at the screen. Helen, sitting in the front row, had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The judge slammed his gavel. A single, sharp crack that ended Richard's charade. "The jury may retire to deliberate," he said, but his voice no longer held its neutrality. "And I don't think we'll have to wait long." We didn't have to wait long. The jury returned in less than an hour. The verdict was read, clear and firm. Richard Kane was found guilty on all counts: aggravated assault, illegal entry, and making terroristic threats. He received a multi-year prison sentence, long enough that by the time he gets out, he'll be a harmless old man. As the guards led him away, he didn't scream anymore. He just looked at me, an empty stare filled with hatred and defeat. Sarah gradually recovered. The bruises on her face faded, and her arm regained its movement. But some nights, I could still feel her tremble in her sleep, and I knew the scars on her soul would be there for a long time. I was always by her side, her anchor, the safe silence she needed. We didn't need to talk much. We just needed to know the other was there. A few weeks after the trial, Helen started trying to make contact. First came the texts. "I'm sorry. I know I was wrong. Please give me a chance." We didn't reply. Then she started calling. Sarah never answered. Once, I picked up. "What do you want?" I asked. "David, I just want to talk to Sarah." She sobbed on the other end. "I want to apologize to her. I'm so lonely." "That loneliness is a choice you made," I replied, my voice cold as ice, and hung up. It peaked when she showed up at the base gate, begging to be let in. I came up beside her and put my hand on her shoulder. "Whatever you want to do." Sarah turned to me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a clear resolve in her eyes, replacing the sadness. Her pain had forged into steel. "No, David," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. I already gave her a chance. 2 years ago, I begged her to run with me. That night, I opened my door for her. I stood in front of her. "I've done enough." She turned away from the window. "We don't owe her anything else." I nodded. No more words were needed. Our agreement was a clear, definitive end. No torment, just pain that had solidified into resolve. We blocked her number, didn't answer her letters, and cut off all avenues of communication. They no longer existed in our world. Occasionally, I'd hear things about her from acquaintances, that she still lived alone in that old house, the house where the memory of her first husband was trampled, and where she chose to protect her second, tyrannical one. They say she lives very quietly. She chose silence to keep her husband. And now that he's gone, she's left alone with only that silence. As for Sarah and me, we started over. In our small apartment, we rebuilt our peace. The scars are still there, but they're a reminder, not of the pain, but of the battle we fought and won. We are free. Together, a new chapter was beginning, not promising perfection, but it was ours, solid, certain, and unbound by the past.